You know, there are moments in life when the ground shifts beneath our feet so quietly, so steadily, that we don't even realize how much weight we've been carrying until something inside us pauses and we finally exhale. Hard times have a way of doing that. They sneak up on us, they surround us, and before we know it, we're standing in the middle of a storm we never asked for, trying to remember how the world looked before the clouds rolled in. And if we're honest with ourselves, most people spend their lives believing they'll avoid the storm entirely, as if strength is something we build only when the sun is shining. But the truth is, the hardest moments, the ones that bend us, break us, and force us to confront who we really are, those are the moments that teach us what endurance actually means. Those are the moments that reveal whether we're willing to show up for one another, whether we're willing to keep going even when every part of us is tired. And the question I keep coming back to is this: when everything feels heavy, when the world seems uncertain, and the path ahead disappears into the dark, where do we find the strength to keep moving? In the early 21st century, we saw a world changing faster than most people could make sense of. Technology connected us in ways that felt miraculous, shrinking continents, amplifying voices, breaking barriers, yet that same technology sometimes left us feeling more isolated than ever. We witnessed economies rise and collapse, communities flourish and fracture, democracies grow stronger and, at times, dangerously fragile. We endured a global pandemic that brought the modern world to its knees, revealing both the incredible resilience of ordinary people and the stark inequalities that shaped who suffered most. Climate disasters no longer felt like predictions. They became lived realities for families losing homes, farmers losing seasons, children losing the sense that their future would resemble their present. And through all of it, people were searching for a foothold, something solid, something human in a time when uncertainty was the only constant. You felt it in the quiet conversations between neighbors checking in on one another. You felt it in the exhaustion of nurses working double shifts, in the resolve of teachers reinventing their classrooms overnight, in the courage of young activists who refused to believe that injustice was simply the cost of doing business in a complicated world. And you felt it in the grief for loved ones lost, for time stolen, for dreams delayed. Hard times don't just challenge our systems, they test the emotional and moral fabric that binds us. And I've thought a lot about that fabric, about how it frays, how it's repaired, how it holds. Because when I look back on my own life, I realize that the strength we talk about so often isn't forged in comfort. It was there in my mother's quiet perseverance, raising two kids while working jobs that barely paid the bills. It was there in my grandparents' generation, shaped by war and depression, who believed that dignity was found not in how easy life was, but in how faithfully you carried your responsibilities. And it was there on the south side of Chicago where I spent years as a young organizer walking into neighborhoods that had been forgotten by policymakers, overlooked by investors, dismissed by the powerful. Those communities taught me something that no book ever could, that the world doesn't simply become better on its own. People make it better. People who show up when they're tired. People who refuse despair. People who sacrifice something small today so that someone else might gain something bigger tomorrow. Every now and then, I'd sit in a church basement or a living room or a school auditorium surrounded by folks who had every reason to give up, and yet they didn't. They talked about broken streets, broken schools, broken promises, but they also talked about hope. Not the kind of hope that asks nothing of you, not the kind that floats above reality. I mean, the kind that rolls up its sleeves. That gets messy, that understands progress, is slow and often painful, but necessary. That's the strength I learned from them, not loud, not flashy, not easy, but steady, resilient, human. And later, when I found myself sitting in the Oval Office, a room filled with history, but also with the weight of decisions that affect millions, I realized something that still stays with me. Hard times expose everything. They strip away the illusions. They uncover the vulnerabilities of our institutions. They reveal the character of our leaders. They magnify the stakes of every choice, every mistake, every hesitation. But they also clarify what matters. They remind us that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's a living project that survives only when people are willing to defend it, not just in moments of celebration, but especially when it's under strain. And if you're watching this right now, if you're listening closely, I want you to reflect on your own story because all of us, at some point, face storms that feel bigger than we are. Maybe you've already been through one. Maybe you're in the middle of one right now. Maybe you're carrying something you've never said out loud. And maybe you're wondering how much longer you can keep walking. If that's you, I want you to stay with me for a moment. And if any part of this resonates, I want you to tell me in the comments what strength looks like in your life. Because when we talk about these things openly, we build a community where no one has to pretend they're unbreakable. And while you're here, subscribe not for me, but so you stay connected to reflections that might help you through the next storm. Because storms will come, they always do, but so will clarity, so will courage, so will the moments that remind us that we are never as alone as we think. As I sit with these memories, I'm reminded that hardship has never been just a headline or a statistic. It's personal. It's the late night worry about a bill you're not sure you can pay. It's the uncertainty of a diagnosis you didn't expect. It's the quiet ache of missing someone who isn't coming back. Hard times shape us long before we ever realize we're being shaped. And if we're honest with ourselves, most of us don't feel strong when we're in the middle of them. We feel overwhelmed. We feel small. We feel tired. Strength only becomes visible in hindsight after we've walked through the fire, after we've held on longer than we thought we could, after we've discovered, almost accidentally, that we were sturdier than we believed. And it's not just individuals who face these trials. Nations do too. The early 21st century reminded us of that. We saw democratic institutions tested by polarization, disinformation, and a growing sense that people were living in different realities. We watched families struggle through economic upheaval, wondering whether the promises they were raised on still held true. We witnessed environmental disasters that made clear how fragile our relationship with the planet had become. And we saw a loneliness rise paradoxically in the most connected age in human history. But here's the thing. Even in those moments, there were sparks of resilience everywhere. A nurse holding the hand of a patient who couldn't see their family, a grocery worker showing up every day during a pandemic so someone else's child could eat, a firefighter wading through floodwaters, a teacher staying up late into the night trying to make a remote lesson feel like a lifeline, a young person barely old enough to vote, standing in the heat of protest, demanding a more just future. Hard times reveal the cracks in our systems, yes, but they also reveal the light that slips through. I remember countless decisions in the White House where the stakes were high enough to keep me awake long after the briefings ended. Decisions about war and peace, about healthcare, about the economy. Decisions where there was no perfect answer, only the hope that you could make the choice that would protect the most vulnerable, even when you knew the cost, even when you knew the criticism that would come. And in those moments, I often thought back to lessons learned long before politics, back when I was walking Chicago streets, knocking on doors, trying to convince people who had every reason to doubt that their voices still mattered. There was an older woman, I must have been in my 20s, who told me something I never forgot. She said, "Young man, hope is the thing you choose when you have no reason left to choose it." At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I just nodded, probably looking wiser than I was. But years later, sitting at that resolute desk, her words came back to me. Because hope isn't blind. It isn't foolish. It's strategic. It's a decision to keep going even when the evidence around you suggests you might not make it. And it's in our hardest moments, when the economy shakes, when a virus spreads, when democracy strains under the pressure of division, that hope becomes not just a feeling, but a responsibility. Now, some folks might hear that and think it sounds naive, but I've learned that cynicism is the real illusion, the belief that nothing can change, that people are too selfish, that history is nothing more than a cycle of disappointment. It's easy to think that when times are tough. But if that were true, none of the progress we've made as a nation, as a species, would have happened. People would have given up long ago, but they didn't, and they still don't. And I want you to think about your own story again, your own resilience. Because I guarantee there's a chapter in your life you didn't think you'd get through, something you didn't think you'd survive, but you did. And if you're comfortable, share that in the comments. Share what helped you push through. Share what you learned about yourself. You might be surprised how many people reading your words will feel a little less alone because of them. Hit subscribe so you don't miss these reflections, because sometimes hearing someone else put words to the things you've been feeling can make the load just a little lighter. Not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds you there's a community here walking through the storm with you. In the end, hard times are universal. None of us escape them. But the meaning we draw from them, the way they shape us, stretch us, deepen us, that's something we choose. And I've found over and over that when we choose connection over isolation, empathy over indifference, courage over despair, we don't just endure the storms, we're transformed by them.